Okay, seid ihr ready? Ich glaube, wir starten.
Wir starten.
Die Letzten können noch schön leise reinkommen und sich leise auf ihre Stühle setzen. Sarah.
Wird jetzt auch auf Deutsch übersetzt. Immer noch.
Jetzt wird auch auf Deutsch übersetzt. Wir
Weil
machen alles auf Englisch.
Wir switchen jetzt auf Englisch. Okay, we got a few questions for you. I just told you to take your time for every single answer because I just love listening to you, and I just heard loads of other people saying how amazing it is just to sit at your feet and learn from you and what God has put on your life. So thank you for spending this time with us. The first question, do you think there's a connection between the rise of gender people, homosexuality, and the number of divorces and absence of fathers in our culture?
That's a very good question, and I think, yes, I think fatherlessness, I think absent fathers are causing a lot of social issues, and certainly not having a father is, well, let's start with, it's bad for boys because they don't have a day-to-day model of what it means to be a man. And by the way, I am going to talk about this in the next talk. The next talk is on masculinity, and so, of course, I have to deal with fatherlessness there. So maybe I'll be brief here. But yes, boys are growing up without father figures in the home. I don't know what the numbers are here, but in the U.S., 40% of children are now growing up without their natural father. And many of them see their father rarely, if at all. And it is the highest rate of single parenthood in the world. The U.S. has the highest rate of single parenthood in the world. And so, yes, boys are growing up without a day-to-day model of what it means to be a man. And of course, girls are growing up without a day-to-day model of what it means to be treated well by a man and to be loved and cherished by a man. So I think that's a very perceptive question. I think that lack of fathers in the home, well, we already know it's causing other problems, right? We already know that fatherless children are more likely to drop out of school, to have conflicts with school and with parents. They're more likely to be addicted to drugs and alcohol. They're more likely to be runaways, right? Run away from home. And they're more likely to end up behind bars. That is, they're more likely to be in prison. I used to work for an international prison ministry called Prison Fellowship. And so we knew firsthand that the majority of people behind bars were from fatherless homes, especially violent criminals. I forget the precise numbers now, but something like 80% of violent offenders are coming from fatherless homes. So we already know that growing up without a father causes a host of social pathologies. And so I don't know if people have made the connection yet, doing studies yet on sexuality issues, whether that's fatherlessness is also causing sexual confusion. But I'll bet it does. I think that's a very good question, and it's something that people should start studying, since we do know that fatherlessness is so devastating to children.
Yes.
Thank you. So we go into the theme of transitions, non-binarity. There are two questions that I want to connect. The first one is, why do trans people change their body with surgery if they don't believe it's what defines their gender? And another question that is connected is, how do you see non-binarity? Isn't it a better solution than non-reversal transitions?
Yeah, the question of why would you change your body if you don't think your body defines your gender? That's a really good question. What that shows is an internal contradiction in the ideology, right? Every non-Christian worldview is going to have contradictions. And that, I don't think that they can solve that one. I think that is a bona fide, genuine contradiction in gender ideology. Namely that, if my body doesn't define my gender, why do I have to change my body, if I think my gender is changed? So all we can do is help people to recognize that they are living a contradiction, and maybe they would be mentally healthier if they got rid of that contradiction. If they said, no, I think I'll live in tune with my body, I'll live in harmony with my body. Every non-Christian worldview has some contradictions. It's just a flat contradiction. And non-binary, well, like I said last night, for young people in schools today, that is considered the safe, the safe alternative, because you don't have to justify being a boy or being a girl or being trans. You can just say, I'm non-binary. And it's very, very common now. Non-binary is now the most common identity that children in school are claiming, just because it is safe and easy. And nobody wants to be a boring old heterosexual. Heterosexuality is now this boring passé thing. And so at least you're a little bit edgy if you're non-binary. And so yeah, it's very popular. But I tend to think that you said, is it preferable or something like that? The question was.
It's a better solution.
Is it a better solution? Well, it's not a solution, but right. But it is, maybe it's a less harmful identification, because you don't have to change your body, you don't have to change your name, you don't have to change your pronouns. You can just say, hey, I don't feel that comfortable being a girl or a boy. Well, yeah, that means you reject stereotypes. I think that's healthy, to reject stereotypes. So most of us will probably agree with most kids' reasons for claiming a non-binary identity, and we would just say, but what did I say this morning? At the clinic where Alex, remember the story of Alex? She went to a clinic, and I love the way they put it, because I read the clinic statement, and they said, they tried to help Alex realize, be less rigid in her concept of gender. In other words, she had this rigid, they're the ones with the rigid stereotypes, by the way, right? Transgenderism involves very rigid stereotypes. It means if you deviate at all from this stereotype of being a woman, then you must be really a man. Or if you deviate at all from this very rigid stereotype, John Wayne masculinity image, then you're not really a man. You might be a woman. So it does rest on rigid stereotypes, and we have to help them to see that. Nobody wants rigid stereotypes. That's a negative thing. So it's a useful thing for us to use in helping people to realize transgenderism involves rigid stereotypes. And remember, Alex, they said, you can be a girl who plays with Barbie dolls, or you can be a girl who plays softball or hockey. So I think the non-binary kids are the ones who are saying, I just don't like these rigid stereotypes. So we can find some common ground with them. We can say, well, we don't accept these rigid stereotypes either. God has created very, very rich variety of people. And remember the gifts of the Spirit. Last night when I said, you and I probably think teaching and prophecy are masculine, and you and I probably think mercy and service are more feminine. And the scripture doesn't say that. It says the Holy Spirit distributes them to the individuals as he chooses. That's the rest of that verse, which was not on the slide. The Holy Spirit distributes them to the individuals. And so I think the non-binary phenomenon is just reminding us that in the church, we should be very open to people with a wide variety of gifts, skills, talents, and be very accepting of people who don't fit some kind of cultural stereotype. And when we talk about masculinity later today, we'll also talk about where some of these stereotypes came from. Some of them are cultural constructions, and when we recognize that, it will also help us to be less rigid in our stereotypes.
Wow, you already answered the question that is
all of the questions. No, I'm just kidding. I'm going to preach about real women in a couple of weeks. Can you come and do it for me? You're amazing. There's more than one question of how do you define what a woman is and a man is?
I'll give two answers. On the one hand, there's basic biology, right? And we may as well start there. Men are bigger, stronger, faster. Because of testosterone, they are on average more aggressive and risk-taking. And it's very important that as Christians we say, these are just the creational givens, and they are good. Yes. Right? We have to affirm the basic masculine traits as good, as God-given. I think one reason that the rise of feminism is, however, is that feminine traits have not been valued. that being a mother and raising children and being nurturing, those traits have not been as valued in modern culture. And women have been, well, I certainly was. Growing up, I was certainly absorbed the feminist message that it's kind of second class to be a mother and raise children, and that you want to get out in the workplace and make a name for yourself in your career. Yeah. And so we also have to recognize that we need to find a way to affirm the feminine traits as good. I mean, we're both human, right? Men and women. Men and women are more alike than they are different. so it's important to recognize that, to recognize we share human nature. So when we talk about the distinctions, those are mostly biological, right? Women have children. Women bear and nurse children. And that takes a large portion of their lives, usually, and certainly before the modern age, before birth control. Through most of human history, much of a woman's adult life was taken up with pregnancy, nursing, and babes in arms, or a babe on your back, right? A sling on your back. And so it is important to recognize that women's strengths are strengths. Right? Because men are physically stronger, we need to recognize that women have their own type of strength. When they have children, they become mama bears. And ironically, even Jordan Peterson has said this. He said, look, we have to recognize that raising children takes character strengths. Raising an infant is 24 hours a day. It means that you have to be immensely empathetic. You have to be immensely attuned to nonverbal communication, because babies don't talk yet. You have to be willing to stop whatever you're doing, because if a baby's crying, you don't scold them, you don't discipline them, you don't reason with them, you meet their distress. So you have to be willing to stop and meet the distress of another human being at the drop of a hat. And he said, these are all strengths. Yeah. We have to recognize that that women's strengths are strengths. So it's important to recognize that men's strengths are strengths, but that women's are as well. Because I think today we think more of those as weaknesses. Well, I certainly did growing up. But then, what was I going to... Women, I was going to answer it a slightly different way as well. But, well, let's look at some of the cultural stereotypes that have grown up. In pre-modern times, women were not restricted to house cleaning and early child care. The modern home is very stripped down. Think of the Proverbs 31 woman. She's doing, from her home, she's able to do several business enterprises. And in the pre-modern West, women were very much involved in household manufacture. So they were making candles and canning food and weaving cloth and making clothes and growing a garden, milking cows. Women contributed economically to the household. And typically, they also worked alongside their husband in whatever craft or trade he did. So that historians tell us that women were working alongside their husbands as silversmiths or wheelwrights or apothecaries, bakers. When I tell people this because I actually lived it. When I was in Germany at age 13, I lived in a small village, and to go shopping, we would take a bag, and we'd go to the baker. And the baker was a husband and wife working side by side. It was the front room of a home. The living quarters are in back and upstairs, and the husband and wife are working together. And then we would go to the butcher, and it was the same thing. The husband and wife are working together. The living quarters are upstairs. And by the way, even the children are there, too. I would see my classmates, all the way up to gymnasium, right? School never went past 1 o'clock, and earlier, too, but it never went past 1 o'clock. Long days were 1 o'clock because it was expected that the children would go home and help with the family business. And then you went to the greengrocer and the same. And one of our neighbors had I don't know what it was not a wine press. It was a press. except it wasn't just grapes. It was apples for apple cider, which was made into schnapps. And husband and wife were working side by side, you know, unless there's apple press. Anyway, so I got to see it, you know, a pre-modern work style when I was 13, living in a small village in Germany. So this, for millennia of human history, women contributed economically to their household because work was in the home or its outbuildings, right? And so both husband and wife could be involved in economically productive work and also at the same time raising their children. Historians tell us that fathers were just as involved in raising children as mothers were, which is hard for us to even imagine. Yeah. So all that to say, when we talk about what is a real woman, we have to realize that we live in a very unique time because the Industrial Revolution took work out of the home. And for the first time, women were sort of stuck at home without any economic opportunities. This is not normal. This is unusual in terms of the vast scope of human history, for women to be at home without opportunities for economically interesting, challenging work. Now, it does happen that many women today are finding ways to bring work home. Did you know that 2/3 of women at home raising their children also have found ways to bring economically productive work at home? 2/3. I was surprised about how high that number, and 25% have a home-based business. So women are finding ways to, in a sense, reproduce, you know, the pre-industrial household by contributing economically to their family. But I think it's very important. I've had so many Twitter debates. My book, which I'll talk about later today, my book on masculinity has been the most controversial book I've written, which surprised me. You know, you would think transgenderism, homosexuality would be more controversial, but actually, my book on masculinity is one more controversial. And one of the kind of questions, challenges I get is from very, very conservative, what I call neo-patriarchalist men. I have had one guy who came to me who repeatedly said, no, women only do housework and childcare. And traditionally, that's all they could do. You know, before the Industrial Revolution, that took all their time. And I'm like, no, historians tell us, no, they were churning butter and making cheese and making clothing. They were doing household manufacture, and they were working alongside their husbands. Wow. And only after the Industrial Revolution did they stop showing up in the public record as silversmiths, breweries, I can't even say that word, breweries, making beer. Wheelwrights, whatever, you know, if you've ever gone to a colonial village, Colonial Williamsburg in America they've recreated a colonial village. Anyway, they drop out of the public record only after the Industrial Revolution. Wow. So when we talk about what's the task, we should not judge the task by the 1950s household. Yeah, really should. You know, we should look. I had fun. I didn't end up putting it in the book, but I had fun researching Luther's wife. Luther's wife was a Proverbs 31 woman. She had fields, she had crops, she had livestock, she had an orchard, she had a brewery. She sold beer and ale. Wow. And of course, I don't know if you know this, but the Luther family lived in what had been a monastery. And so they ran that as almost like a hotel. You know, they had boarders living in there. So that was part of her work. I was astonished when I read everything she did. And then on top of that, she and Martin Luther spent their evenings with leaders of the Reformation. Back then, you didn't have a lot of journals, right? So you would travel and actually stay with leaders. You know, you would come and live in Geneva and see what Calvin was doing. You know, you would come to where and live with the Luthers for a while. And so there were always theological discussions going on in the evenings in Latin. And because his wife, Katharina, his wife had been a nun, so of course she was theologically educated. And I actually read a National Geographic article on Katharina. Katharina, her nickname was Keta, right? K-A umlaut, T-T-A-T-H-E, Keta.
Kata. Can you pronounce that? Kata.
Keta.
Kata.
Sounds cuter.
The reason I have to say it the German way is because Luther would joke that she was her Keta, K-E-T-T-A. So you have to say it the German way. Anyway, but National Geographic actually reported that many people said that Katharina actually contributed a lot to his books. And that people, Luther also nicknamed her his Doctorissa, female doctor. At any rate, she may very well have contributed to a lot of his books. She was a major part of hammering out the theology of the Reformation. So again, when we think of women, we should look historically at what women have done, because it's much, much richer than anything that we have known since the Industrial Revolution. The historical perspective really helps us to answer your question. What is a real woman?
Oh, that really helped me, and I'm like, yay! Go!
Sarah, ich denke, das könnte eine neue Berufung sein für dich, Bierbrauerin.
Oh, gerne.
Ich denke, wir müssen hier einen Cut machen. Danke vielmals. Wir hatten noch so viele Fragen.